Thank you. All right, let's try this again. Hi there, good evening. My name is Claire Kubiesa. I'm the Vice President of the Elmhurst Park Board and have been a resident of Elmhurst for nearly my entire life, over 30 years, and have been on the Park Board since 2019. My fellow commissioners and I voted unanimously on August 5th to give the residents of Elmhurst the choice to fund high priority projects identified by the community. So I'm happy to be here tonight to representing the board as we answer some of your questions you've related to the referendum.
Thank you very much, Claire. My name is Jim Rogers. I'm the Executive Director of the Park District. I've worked for the district for more than 30 years and have lived in town nearly that long as well. As Claire said, we're very happy to be here tonight to answer questions you may have about the referendum, as election day is now less than a week away. So we're very excited about that. We've received more than a half a dozen questions ahead of time, so we'll momentarily here, we'll jump into those and look to answer those for you. In addition, we've also brought along some of our frequently asked questions that we've heard from the community throughout the process, and so we will look to share a few of those as well. I also want to mention that we are, I should say, recording this session so that we can share it for those who are unable to attend tonight. If you have any additional questions during the session, feel free to enter those into the chat and we will do our best to get to those as well. So without further ado, Claire will start us.
All right, I'm going to read some questions off that we received. There's two that I'm going to read back to back because they're quite similar in nature. What days and time will the pickleball courts be open? Pickleball is a very noisy sport, not including voices from players or crowds watching. And how is access to facilities allotted to leagues now, and how would that change? For example, how does the city determine which league practices at 5 p.m. on Wednesdays versus 7 p.m. on Friday?
Thank you very much, Claire. Happy to answer those kind of combined. One clarification I'd like to make just for those watching. The questionnaire refers to how does the city determine, and just want to clarify, again, with it being an election and a referendum, the Elmhurst Park District is a separate unit of local government. We are a separate entity from the city. So you have elected representatives like Claire and the rest of the her fellow park board commissioners that the community elects that are separate from your aldermen that you elect that serve on the city council. But that having been said, to the questions, because we're in the earliest part of the our planning efforts for this facility, and quite frankly, we don't know if the community is going to decide whether it wants to fund the facilities. We have not developed specific schedules for them. However, what we envision is doing something, particularly with the athletic-related facilities like the courts and the indoor turf and things, is something very similar to what we do with our outdoor athletic fields. And that is many, many years ago, now almost 3 decades ago, we developed something called our Athletic Field Advisory Commission. And that is a group made up of representatives from every organization in this community that uses the Park District's outdoor athletic fields. So ball diamonds, soccer fields, football fields, lacrosse, cross country, you name it. And that includes representatives from every youth athletic group you can think of, Eagles football, the baseball groups, Eagles cheerleading, I'm trying to think, ASO soccer, Team Elmhurst soccer. But in addition, Elmhurst University, School District 205, and even our own Park District programming staff who use the fields for our own programs as well. And what we do is we meet with that group on a regular basis, and it's been very, very beneficial over the years because what it's led to is helping each of the groups understand the many, many needs that all of the groups have, and also the available space that we have to try to meet those needs in program. So it's been a very mutually beneficial opportunity and organization there to bring folks together. So we imagine doing something similar here if and when we have indoor gymnasium space and indoor turf spaces, getting those various user groups together to meet and plan and try to figure out how we could best serve as many of the needs as possible. One thing I would want to mention specifically about both of those facility spaces that I've mentioned, the gyms and the indoor turf, is that both of them are planned to have what you might have seen in other facilities is the drop-down indoor netting that will allow us to subdivide the facilities as well. So we think that will help us to serve multiple user groups as well.
Great, thanks, Jim. Next question that was submitted asks, what percentage of the new Wagner Center project will be for classes, etc., that are not sports?
Great, thank you. Great question, and kind of a good question following the first question, which was kind of more sports focused. I don't have the exact percentage of spaces available for non-sports, but what I the way I can answer that question though is to say that this facility is intended, one of the high points of the referendum is intended to provide year-round recreation for all ages, much more so than we're able to do at the current Wagner Center, given the space limitations. And we will have more than twice as much space in this new facility for programs like dance, preschool, early childhood, general interest. I even put down community meeting room spaces because right now we aren't really able to facilitate community groups in town that want to have somewhere to meet for their monthly meetings and that kind of a thing, because we simply don't have available space during the times that they would like to meet. So again, we're very, very excited about the possibility of doing that, but we do look forward to having more than twice as much space, I should say, for non-sports related programs.
Great. On to the next. Roughly when would the city offer the bonds, and are they fixed rate or variable rate?
Great question. And again, just to clarify, so everyone understands, again, City of Elmhurst separate from the Elmhurst Park District, but to the specific question, in order to get a 2024 bond levy, meaning taxes would be collected in 2025, we would have to issue a bond. The park board would have to approve the issuance of a bond no later than March 1st of 2025. And then that bond and those new taxes would appear on the tax bills that all of us Elmhurst residents would pay in 2025. And then as to the type of bond, it would be a fixed rate bond that would be fixed rate over the 25-year period of time.
Great, thanks, Jim. Here's the next one. Hi, I really believe the Park District is on the right track with the most recent proposal concept. However, I am concerned about the price per square foot in the proposal. According to Community Playmaker, it costs between $330 and $350 per square foot to build a recreation center, and that includes the cost of the land. Our new Wagner Center is coming in at $670 per square foot without having to pay for the land. Similarly, each of the 4 heated bathrooms come in at over $1,000 per square foot, and again, we own the land. I am wondering how the Park District Board is justifying such high construction costs. Did the board consider other architectural plans that would result in a similar space, but at an average cost more consistent with the market? I understand that the plan includes inflation and mid-grade finishes.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you very much for that detailed question. Appreciate that. The Park District spent extensive time during 2023 developing the conceptual plans and the associated cost estimates for the projects, working with professional architects, engineers, and construction cost estimators from Dewberry Architects. As the questionnaire noted, it does account for inflation. Because these projects would not be constructed until 2026 and 2027. Dewberry itself is a nationwide firm of planning, design, and construction professionals that has designed and built hundreds of facilities over more than 60 years. And these cost estimates are based on current projects in the Chicagoland area and where bids are coming in, and also based upon their prior work designing and building recreational facilities as well. And one example that we've liked to cite, because this isn't thank you questionnaire again, you're not the first one to ask this question, but one example, and we like it because it's very concrete in our community example, is that right now there is a new health sciences building currently under construction on the campus of Elmhurst University. You could drive by the campus right now at the south end, and you see the big construction crane. That building is 45,000 square feet at a planned cost of $30 million, which also is a coincidence, sort of, but it happens to come out to $666 a square foot. And while this is not necessarily an exact apples to apples comparison, it does lead us to believe that our numbers are sound. Again, as I said, particularly factoring in inflation. So that kind of speaks to the Wagner Community Center. As regards to the restroom buildings, the Park District is planning to install pre-manufactured, precast concrete structures similar to the one that is in, if you've ever seen it, that is in the southwest corner of Barron's Park by the tennis courts and the playgrounds. For a point of comparison, last year in 2023, we purchased a similar structure, although smaller, likely smaller than the ones that we're planning that will be built or installed, I should say, as part of the referendum. But we bought one of these buildings as part of our Canine Corner dog park that is currently under construction. And the cost of that facility was a little more than $200,000. So when we consider the fact that we're looking a couple years after that, or I should say maybe 3+ years after that, adding the cost to install the structure as well, and then also looking at the necessary surveying, permitting, and then bringing in utility services, which could include water, sewer, and electrical services, because we don't know the exact location of where these buildings would necessarily be in the parks. We feel good and feel that the cost proposal or cost estimates for the restroom buildings are sound as well.
Great, thanks, Jim, and thank you for that question.
Claire, if I might, before you continue, so just wanted to mention, so those are all the questions that we've received in advance. I would ask any of the residents online, and I'm looking at our other staff in the room to see if we've received any other questions. Oh, looks like we might have one that was sent in. I'm just going to read it real quick, and then I will share with the group here. Oh, okay. Neat question. Just want to make sure I understood. Oh, please, Claire, I'm so sorry. You're doing the questions. Take it from there. You take it from there. Yes, please.
All right, here we are. Thank you for sending in this question. Are there any permitted mechanisms for attracting private businesses to the community or issuance of RFI, RFQ for entities to bring private businesses to the community which align with efforts or offerings of the long-term referendum and Park District goals? For example, a bike shop to replace what Stempel Cycles offer to the community. Any chance for attracting a hybrid private/public model like Courts Plus is for tennis?
Great. I want to just peek at that question again to make sure that I fully understand it. Are there any mechanisms for attracting private business community of issuance of RFI, RFQ for entities? So I'm gonna do my best to answer this question as best I can, and certainly questionnaire, if you want to follow up with us afterwards, feel free. I'm trying to understand if the question specifically sort of relates to the referendum projects. I'm kind of feeling like maybe it doesn't. But I'm going to first answer it in terms of the referendum itself. And so when we're required as a public entity to do a public bidding process, which allows and enables any potential vendors or contractors to bid on that. So it would be open to, yes, local, but also anyone in the market that chose to bid. So we don't have an ability to specifically limit it to local businesses, for example. So that may or may not be a part of your question. But then your notion of to bring private businesses which align with the efforts, for example, a bike shop to replace what Stempel's offer to the community. I want to say not specifically. That isn't necessarily something that the district is considering right at the moment in terms of something like a bike shop, and I realize it's just an example. But again, district is always looking for opportunities to be creative in how we do this. At our previous virtual Q&A, someone had asked a question that I think semi-relates to this, and I apologize if I'm not quite hitting it, but asked about if the new Wagner Center is built, would there be an opportunity to look at doing something like a coffee shop type of operation in the Wagner Center, similar to what goes on at the Elmhurst Public Library. And so that, again, that notion of potentially partnering with local businesses in the community and offering additional services. So yes, kind of always open to any types of opportunities there. And I hope I've tried to do my best to answer that question as best I can, is my understanding of it. And then I was going to mention, so that now then, checking again, any other questions from the chat? Okay, no other questions from the chat. So what we thought we would do is we would take a few minutes and go through some of the other questions that have been very frequently asked in prior open houses and the presentations that we've done, just to kind of give a little bit more information. So again, we appreciate the questions that have been shared, and if any others come up during the chat, please feel to send them along.
Send them in. All right, here's the next I got for you, Jim. What needs were identified through the Elevate Elmhurst Parks process?
Great, thank you, Claire. Lots of needs, and the referendum proposal really specifically looks to address those that were highest mentioned by the community. And when we surveyed the community back in 2023, what we asked them about was a whole host of different recreational amenities, indoor, outdoor, you name it. And we asked the community to describe how important those recreational amenities were to them, to their household, I should say. And then we asked them to also evaluate their unmet need. And it's we like it. It's something called a priority ratings index. And it's very nice because it doesn't just ask you how important is this to your household. It also asks how much of an unmet need you have, because you might say that playgrounds are very important to me, but I have one right down the block, and I feel like there's a lot of them in the community. So therefore, I don't have much of an unmet need, and therefore it wouldn't rise as high. But what's being proposed in the referendum really tries to address the things that were highest in both importance and unmet need. And more broadly, kind of what came out of our engagement efforts were the urgency that the community feels for what the Park District is trying to address. And that's centered around a few different components. One is aging facilities. The Elmhurst Park District manages more than 24 different facilities in the community, the average age of which is between 50 and 60 years old. Second is overflowing demand. When we did this study back in 2023, the last full year of information that we had to look at was the year of 2022. And that year alone, we had 5,600 individuals who wanted to participate in programming with the Park District that we simply had to turn away because we did not have enough facility space to offer the programs that they wanted to take. The third urgency point that came up was space versus need. And what this speaks to is the fact that, as I said, the Park District operates about 24 facilities, but many of those facilities and some of our major ones are facilities that were built for one original purpose a long time ago, and then the Park District has repurposed them and kind of tried to make do with them as best we can. And there's no greater example of that, obviously, than the Wagner Community Center, which is a elementary school that was originally built in the late 1950s. And then the last area of urgency was funding, and we'll talk about funding a little bit later when we get to some of the further questions.
Great, thanks. So what projects then are being proposed to address those needs?
Thank you, Claire. And again, I'm thinking many of the callers on this call probably are aware of some of these, but first and foremost, looking at reimagining the Wagner Community Center and taking down the existing elementary school building and replacing it with an entirely new building. The current building is about 32,000 square feet, and the new building would be a little over 127,000 square feet, so 4 times the size. It would include a free 3-lane elevated indoor walking jogging track for residents. It will be elevated above the gymnasium that would be there to serve basketball, volleyball, pickleball needs. We have an indoor turf space as well, first of its kind in the community. That would be what's 60 by 40 yard field, which is considered a U9 or 7B7 field. We would also have dedicated early childhood and preschool spaces with a secure separate entrance. We'd have larger spaces for gymnastics and dance. We'd have an indoor play area for children, and we'd have flexible multi-purpose spaces for programming and community gathering, as I mentioned before. And then in addition to that, that's kind of addressing the indoor amenity needs that the community cited. From an outdoor perspective, we would be looking at adding permanent outdoor, year-round outdoor restroom buildings to a number of our parks. Community is telling us that they'd like to see us try to move away from porta potties in so many parks that we have them in now. We're looking at those in 4 different locations: up on the north end of town at Crestview Park, at the south end of town at Eldridge Park, in Wilder Park in the center of town, and then also looking to have one along the Prairie Path as well. In addition, from an outdoor park amenities perspective, the community said they would like us to look to provide a permanent community band shell in Wilder Park. The Elmhurst Park District has been offering concerts and performances and movies in Wilder Park our records show back since the 1940s, one of the first recreation programs the district ever offered, but always with temporary staging, whether that's staging that was rented and put on the site, or for many decades we had something called a showmobile, which was a stage on a trailer bed that we drove and backed into the park. But now the community is telling us they'd like to see us do something more permanent. But again, we're stressing that it's a community band shell that would be in Wilder Park. And so still that same experience that the community is used to having. It's bring your lawn chair, bring your blanket. We are not looking to do something like building the Tinley Park Amphitheater or something like that. Still looking to provide community-based experiences. And then finally, up at Barron's Park, adjacent to the proposed new Wagner Community Center, converting one of our natural grass soccer fields over to synthetic turf for a couple of reasons. The synthetic turf provides a lot more playability. Don't have to worry about rainouts, don't have to worry so much about weather. Those fields can almost be used year round now. And then also with the new proposed Wagner Center, we will be taking up a good portion of one of the natural grass fields there in Wagner, in Barron's, for parking. So this field, as well as the indoor turf, would help to mitigate the loss of that space as well.
Very good, thank you. All right, I imagine that most folks know the answer to this, since some of the questions involved this earlier, but what is the expected total cost for all those projects you just mentioned?
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. That total cost is just a bit over $89 million. And I think this is a great point to mention for those on the call, that you can visit the Elmhurst Park District's website. And we have a significant referendum page with all the cost information, all the plans, lots of these FAQs and others as well, that you can visit as well for more details.
Great, thank you. All right, why build a new Wagner? Why not just renovate?
Great question as well. And we have we looked into this extensively when we began our planning process. And I've mentioned we've done a number of community meetings over the last few months, including visiting with a number of the PTAs in Elmhurst. And in doing that, we've been in a number of the elementary schools that have had some amazing, obviously there's new elementary schools that have been built, but also some of the existing schools that have had some amazing renovations. And so we've been able to see kind of what is possible from a renovation perspective. But when we looked at the Wagner Community Center, it has not had, we've done our best to keep it up as well as we could over the 20 years we've owned it. But when we looked at it, it has significant constraints to it, whether that be from an accessibility perspective, from a safety perspective, and really the building itself is so limited. An example I like to give when we've had open houses there is that when we bought it, we put in a sprinkler system, the type that you have in case there's a fire in the building. As a public agency and public entity, the board wanted to be sure that it was safe for the public. But if you've been up at the Wagner Center, you'll see that the piping and the sprinkler heads for that are literally right in the hallways. Whereas in more modern buildings, they're up above the ceiling and they're between the ceiling and the roof. But building standards were much different back in the 1950s, and there quite honestly isn't enough room between the ceiling and the roof for us to have put that sprinkler system in. So that's just kind of a good example of some of the limitations that we have there. But then even more so, when we looked at that and we've seen the schools that have been renovated, what the community is telling us is that they want and need more space. So if we renovated the Wagner Center, it would still be a renovated and updated elementary school. It would not be a community center. And many of those rooms are undersized and don't have the amenities that the community is looking for from a community center. One great example I like to mention when we have these meetings too is we offer a lot of early childhood programs at the Wagner Center. Our staff does a fantastic job running them and maintaining the building and all of that. But in today's society, folks who have their little ones in early childhood programs expect, quite frankly, that there would be toileting facilities in the early childhood classrooms, and we don't have that in any of our early childhood classrooms. So those are the types of things where we're just kind of beyond renovating or expanding the current Wagner Center and are seeing if the community wants to fund something new.
Thank you, Jim.
Yes, we do. Yep, we have a couple. Yes, we'll hit a couple questions that came in from the chat.
Okay, here we go. Thank you for sending these in. Here we go. How long will we be without Wagner Center and its programs?
Let's do that one first. And thank you for sending that in. And you read our mind because it's one of our future questions. So the schedule, and again, schedule is on the website if you want to see it for yourself. But the planned timing is that if this referendum passes in about a week, we would spend the bulk of 2025 doing two things. One is doing detailed design development, engineering, permitting, and bidding to build the new facilities, particularly the Wagner Center. And then we would be also making plans to temporarily relocate our programs out of that building because obviously if we're going to demolish it, we can't still be there. And we would be looking to, there's kind of a couple of ways we would be looking to do that. One, we would maximize the use of existing Park District facilities to the fullest extent possible. And then we would likely look to rent space in town as well for the period of time while we were under construction, whether that be potentially some retail or commercial space for some of our programming, and then perhaps even warehousing space for our gymnastics and dance type of programs. But with that schedule, then what we would look at is we are looking at we would move out of the current Wagner Center starting in fall of 2025. And then we would begin demolition of the current building and then begin construction. And that would be a 2-year period. And we would look to move back into the new Wagner Center in fall of 2027.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And then the second question that was sent in asks, will we have enough basketball courts to support an in-house Elmhurst league? Great
question. And I'm gonna make a little bit of an assumption that you might be talking about like an adult league. So the way I would want to answer that is to mention that we do have adult basketball leagues. Questioner, you may not be aware of those. And one of the reasons that you may not be youth league, perfect, youth league. Yes, so we would certainly look to be expanding our offerings. And again, your question is a great one because there are many, many programming opportunities that the Park District simply does not look to provide because we literally don't have the space. So yes, an expansion of youth basketball would definitely be something that we would want to look at. the questionnaire might be aware that there's an organization in town called Elmhurst Airborne, which is I believe it's a fully travel-based program playing other communities. So you might be asking about, and oh, you said something in-house. Yes, we would look at opportunities to do something like that for sure.
Maybe it's worth to point out that it'd be similar to like Oak Brook Park District's
Sure.
facility, which I
Yep.
believe does house some type of lake. So it could be
Yes, and that's a
very
great point.
feasible.
Yes, and that's a great point too, Claire. In terms of, I should have maybe mentioned this, in terms of folks looking and wondering about the size of the facilities, the gymnasium that we are proposing is very comparably sized to the facility at the Oak Brook Park District, if you've ever happened to have been there, and it has the same size elevated walking track of 1/8 of a mile. So if you've been there, or if you want to pop over there or go on the website or Google it, you can get a feel for that. And then in terms of the indoor turf, the example that we've been giving, because we know a lot of folks in Elmhurst have been there, is the Ackerman Center in Glen Ellen, which is a comparably sized indoor turf facility to what we would be looking at constructing here as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great.
I'm gonna jump back over
Yep,
here. Okay. Why can't the district just fund these projects through its existing budget?
Sure. Great question. And there are a couple of reasons for this. From the macro perspective, and again, as Claire obviously lives in town, I do as well, as I mentioned, have for 30 years. And the park board, more than anything, is always looking to be good stewards of the community's tax dollars. And one thing that's a positive for all of us as taxpayers is that the park district is subject to something called a non-referendum bond limit. And what that means is that Claire and her fellow commissioners can only take on so much debt without going to referendum. And quite frankly, we view that as a very positive safeguard, and I believe taxpayers should as well. So to do a project of the size and scope and quite frankly, cost of the Wagner Community Center, the park board simply cannot do that without going to referendum. So if this type of facility is ever going to happen in this community, it will have to be because the community passes a referendum. And then the notion of, what about doing it within the existing budget? Quite frankly, the district's finances are not such that we could ever, for example, save up to fund a facility like this. The park district receives, you may not know this, receives 5 cents of every property tax dollar that each of us pays on an annual basis. So again, just 5% of the local property tax bill. And with 30 parks that we maintain and almost 500 acres of open space, in addition to those 24 buildings and numerous other facilities, we would not be able to fund something like this with our existing budget.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, you kind of answered this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to ask again. What would the impact be on my tax bill if this is approved?
Sure. Again, a question that's been asked a lot, and I'll again reference that for those on the call that you can go to our website and get some of this information as well. But what we're looking at is the way we've answered this question on these calls and things is the median value of a home in Elmhurst right now is about $500,000, and the cost for that home would be about $317 a year. Want to mention that on our website, in addition to having a chart that shows some of the costs, we also have a property tax calculator where you can go in yourself, take your property tax bill, take your equalized assessed value from your specific bill, enter it into that calculator, and it will calculate exactly what the cost would be for you and your household. But I'd also like to note here when we talk about this, that this is not a permanent tax increase. It is a 25-year bond. I like to describe it as being similar to a mortgage. And in our meetings, we know that we've heard a number of folks kind of giggle and roll their eyes and say, "Oh, come on, it'll be permanent tax increase." Those things never come off the tax rolls. Well, we all are living in a community where there's an actual real life example of that, and that is the Elmhurst Public Library. They passed a referendum in the year 2001 for a 20-year bond to build the new Elmhurst Public Library, and in 2021 that was paid off, and the Elmhurst Public Library's tax rate did in fact drop back when that was paid off.
Great, thank you. What would happen if this isn't approved?
Right, great question. Without the bond funding, the planned new Wagner Community Center would not happen. And as I mentioned before, simply from a financial perspective, the other upgrades and new facility developments will be deferred and could potentially be addressed sometime in the future, but are not guaranteed to happen given the district's limited financial resources, as I mentioned before. However, if it doesn't happen, as always, the district will prioritize maintaining safe and accessible recreation facilities while also exploring alternative ways to meet evolving park and recreation needs. One thing that we're very excited that we were able to accomplish this year is with the park board's approval, or I should say, upon the park board's approval, earlier this year, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Ray Graham Association, The Rio Grande Association, if you aren't aware, owns and operates a facility at the more towards the south end of town, on Madison Street or Avenue, I think, west of Spring Road. It's also a former elementary school, like the Wagner Center, but they have a nice gymnasium and some classroom programming space, and we entered into an agreement with them where in which we helped fund the renovation and updating of their gymnasium, and we are now using that facility for programming after school and on nights and on weekends as well. So we are always looking for creative ways to try to address the recreation and programming needs of the community. That will help to an extent, but certainly not to the extent that the new Wagner Center might.
For sure. Thank you.
That would be addressed.
Yes. Skip that. All right. Here we go.
We're reading some of our FAQs from our site, and we've kind of addressed some of these. Maybe we go to
Yes,
that one.
okay. When was the last time the Park District went to referendum?
Great question as well, and this is a part of our materials as well. If the referendum were to pass, it would truly be a historical milestone. The Elmhurst Park District has not gone to referendum since 1971, so that's 53, almost 54 years ago. And again, just to be clear, have not gone. We haven't gone and one failed. We literally have not gone since 1971. In that same period of time, as I mentioned, the Elmhurst Public Library successfully passed a referendum in the year 2001, and also in that 53-year period, the Elmhurst School District has gone to referendum 8 times, with 6 of those being successful. And I think, quite frankly, that both the library and the school district are excellent representations, I should say, of the community deciding to invest in those organizations and their operations and their facilities, and we have terrific facilities in this community as a result.
Wonderful. Thank you. What benefits will the community see with these projects?
Sure. That's a great question. And again, a lot of that information can be found on our website. But in the macro perspective, we kind of think of them in 5 areas. We will be able to significantly increase the year-round recreation that we offer for all ages. A referendum like this and the amenities that would come about as a result of it will protect property values, very similar to quality schools, quality park amenities, open space, help to protect and preserve our property values. We believe they're an economic driver in our community, and they make Elmhurst a better place to live, work, and play. It will provide more modern amenities. As I said, the average age of Park District facilities is between 50 and 60 years old, and the community is telling us that they want newer and better than that. It will provide for an enhanced quality of life in our community, without a doubt, not only, from the perspective of folks enjoying the amenities in town, but Claire, I know with 4 kids that you live this yourself. So many of the families and households in this community spend a lot of time driving to other facilities and other communities to partake in recreation and facilities that they have that our community does not. And then lastly, as we just mentioned a moment ago, it would truly be a historical milestone for Elmhurst as well.
Great. Thanks, Jim. The last one we have on.
Yep, we answered the last one as well, which was where would classes be held during construction. So I'm gonna one more time check and see if we've got anything else in our chats. It looks like we've addressed all of the chat questions. So again, Claire, thank you for kind of moderating tonight our questions. We very much appreciate the opportunity to share this information. Please don't forget, as I said, visit our website, and early voting is going on right now in Elmhurst. You can go over to City Hall through, I believe it is November 4th, and then Election Day, obviously on November 5th at other precincts throughout the community. So please get out and exercise your right to vote. And thank you again very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.